Thanks so much for joining us in this very special event. This is Race, Diversity, and Inclusion for Our Children. I'm Amanda Goodman, the Executive Director of Family and Children's Council. We are very proud and honored to be hosting this today. We have a great panel of true community leaders, true community activists, and we want to welcome all of them. Felicia, let's start with you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Felicia Smith-Knowles. I am with the City of Waterloo. I am the Neighborhood Services Coordinator, and I also am we'll call it the ED for the North End Culture and Arts Center. I stay involved with youth and young people activities, as well as the arts community here in the Cedar Valley. My mother and I train on implicit bias and cultural competency, and it's an honor to be here.
Representative Smith.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Representative Rastafari Smith. I represent Iowa House District 62. And outside of that, I'm a small business owner here, owning Rise Advocacy Services, in which we do grant writing, fundraising for nonprofits geared towards social justice.
Hello, I am Quentin Hart, Mayor for the City of Waterloo. Just glad to be here. Before Mayor of the City of Waterloo, I was the Associate Director of Multicultural Affairs, and I ran a small nonprofit called From the Heart. So glad to be here.
Let's get started with this first of all. We are going to have a very uncomfortable conversation. That's what tonight is all about. But it is the uncomfortable conversations that we as a community have to have. So let's address, first of all of our shirts. We are wearing shirts right now that say Black Kids Lives Matter. Don't turn off Facebook. Don't get angry. Don't leave the room. Don't shout all lives matter. There is a reason this is on our shirt. We are not saying that other children's lives don't matter. Mayor Hart, let's start with you. Why do we need to say things like Black Lives Matter? Black kids' lives matter. Why is this so crucial right now?
Because they do. When you take a look at the images you see on television, the images you see on media, the stereotypes of Black children being overly aggressive and overly police, when you take a look at success rates, when you take a look at discipline rates, within the school systems, Black kids' lives matter, and the value of Black kids' lives matter, because in so many different areas, it seems that it's undervalued, and we need to make a continued special effort to make sure that we protect their lives and not put a glass ceiling on what they can be based upon some other people's perception of Black children. So first and foremost, their lives do matter. I have 3 Black children at my house, 15, 13, and an 8-year-old. And they're taking a look at what they see on TV or how someone talks to them. And we just need to protect their sanctity and put them in a situation, environment where they can thrive and be all that they can be. And it's not just going to happen. We need to fight and continue to make it happen.
Representative Smith, what would you like to add to that? Why should people recite over and over and not get offended when they hear Black Lives Matter, Black children's lives matter?
Well, I think it's because it's been evident since 1619 that they haven't mattered as much. And that's why it's important that on the shirt, we don't say Black Lives Matter too, right? That's implied because for so long it's been demonstrated that Black lives and Black kids' lives haven't mattered. And we're not talking about just police brutality or the criminal justice system, right? I worked at Carver Academy, and I can tell you, even here in Waterloo, the achievement gap is still fairly wide. Therefore, Black kids have to matter just as much as their counterparts who are achieving greater. And I think closing the achievement gap is something that shows that Black kids' lives matter. So I think the mantra of Black Lives Matter and Black Kids Matter is to elevate the issues that in all facets of our community, we haven't mattered. We haven't mattered, not even only as much, we haven't been significant to the way the operations or the structure has been set up. That's what it means to me. That's how I like to talk about it. But I think it's a holistic mantra that Black lives matter, Black kids' lives do matter in every scenario, in every structure, in every part and facet of our community.
I want to switch gears a bit. We were talking a little bit ago before we went live. My good friend Tara Thomas, who is a former journalist, she's now the head of communications for Waterloo School District. She says that community activists, long time, like a Waterloo icon, Anna Mae Weems, told her, Tara, white people will listen to white people. Why is that so vital right now?
Fish don't see water. I mean, it's hard for a person of color to explain my plight to someone that's white who's never had to undergo some of the same things. Someone who can be sitting with me at a restaurant and not undergo some of the same microaggressions. And I know that that's a term that some are trying to get away from because they're not micro in the way they impact you. But the bombardment of things that you go through, I think to understand, to have a white ally stand up and say, no, Black lives do matter, that weight is tenfold. In a racist society, those who have the power are those who we need to be strong allies and step out in front, no longer just beside or behind, stand out in front and help lead the charge towards racial equity and equality.
And you know, it's kind of like when you hear people talk about the invisible voice. When we start talking about Black Lives Matter, if we talk about issues of diversity and inclusion, you know, sometimes white people have like, oh, here they go again. Oh, we're about to get on that again. But when they have someone of their own that may be just like them, that will come and explain a situation or a circumstance, then most times they have a better chance of actually receiving what they're being told. And I know Roz and Felicia can probably tell you that, you know, you could be in meetings. I remember in the past being in meetings and bringing up programs and projects. No one at the table would even listen to it, but you work and you have a white person introduce the same project, and it's like liquid gold at that particular point. So, you know, I think her statement is very true. I'm hoping, though, that we're moving to a more conscientious community now that will start to have those voices that are included in the conversations from beginning.
And when it comes to race, oftentimes it's perceived that racial history is somehow Black history, and there's not a white history component to this. It's your history too. The things that happened, white people did too. And I feel like sometimes it's put on the Black community to educate, and it's on us to inform you of the history that is a true history for all of us. And the importance of us saying Black kids' lives matter is because there's so many parts of society that is telling them that they don't on a daily basis when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to food insecurity, when it comes to education, when it comes to the generalized feeling of safety. We have many outlets telling our kids that they don't matter. The data would tell them that they don't matter. And so it's important that we are using those words and looking them in the eyes and saying, you matter, because we're seeing what happens. Like we're all seeing what happens. And so that mantra and saying it is very important.
And to add to Felicia's point too, because when something matters, you give a different value to it. When something values to it, you treat it differently than something that does not matter. And so, as Roz mentioned a little bit earlier from our history and what Felicia just talked about and brought it back to here, folks need to understand that everyone matters, because if you do, then you'll start to treat Black kids a little bit differently. Then you'll start to look at them differently than you did before.
Here at Family and Children's Council, we are the Child Abuse Prevention Agency. We're the only one in this area. And our take is we work to make sure every child is happy, healthy, and safe. And we know Black children in our community do not feel safe, because the three of you most likely have much different conversations with your children especially if you have sons, than someone who looks like me has with their son before they leave the house. And so we talk about white privilege, and I think a lot of white people get offended when they hear that, but they're not understanding. It doesn't mean that our lives haven't been difficult. It's just our race is not one more thing that's added to the difficulty. So what kind of conversations do you have to have with your children that you want, people who look like me to understand how the vast difference it is?
I think the biggest piece of white privilege to me is the privilege to not have to care. I don't think people understand that concept. The privilege that I don't have to worry about things. The privilege that before I take a vacation, I don't have to first research if it's a racist place or if there's Black people that go there, or even asking, is this something that Black folks do? Because I want to make sure that we're going to be safe. The sad conversations that we have in our house, they're interesting because my daughter is biracial and her father's side is German, like they're real like German citizen Germans. And she's been internalizing a lot of this. And so we've been talking about working hard and doing all that she can do and being an upstanding citizen. But even in the face of all of that, if you're still being treated unfairly, we do the tell your teachers and do and all of that. But I'm preparing her to naturally have to be a stronger person. I'm preparing my son to have to be better, stronger, to have to keep his emotions in check at some point. And I feel that it's unfair, and I also feel that it's unfair that they're being forced to have some of these conversations because it's on TikTok and it's on YouTube. And so even our kids at a very, very young age are processing their death. Like they're processing, my 7-year-old son is processing not if something were to happen to him, but he was talking in terms of, when the police stop me, are they going to kill me too? And so the conversations that we're having to have in our house on a therapeutic level are pretty intense, just based on who our kids are. My son is very emotional. My little girl is a justice fighter. And so she's out here with pride flags and Black Lives Matter things, and like she's all about this. But for some of our babies, I think that because the way media is working right now and social media is so prevalent, we're all having to have some pretty intense talks with our kids at a younger age. And so my approach has had to be more therapeutic because I'm dealing with babies. So my kids are babes. Quentin's got some older kids. How are you doing that, Mayor Hart?
Well, one is trying to have a conversation when you have to explain why. You take a look at George Floyd in Minneapolis, and they're like, my middle son is like, why did it happen? And then trying to explain to him the behaviors that you need to have with any type of traffic stop. And then you take a look at it, and when those behaviors that I'm teaching him were actually done, and then some person still ending up hurt or in jail or dead, that's a tough conversation. Or even having conversations about unlearning or unpacking what they've already learned. We have Independence Day, which great fireworks this weekend, but Independence Day was really Juneteenth. And then explaining why there's a Juneteenth, why there's an Independence Day, the Declaration of Independence versus the Emancipation Proclamation. It's like you have to have, double and triple educational classes for your children to even be able to function. And, it's unfortunate, that I have to tell them you have to be twice as good, work 3 times as hard to do anything compared to those that have, white privilege in this country. But all of those serious conversations we have to have in our household when you're trying to make sure that you're raising conscious young Black boys and girls as well.
Yeah, I'll be brief, but I think for me, my scenario is a little bit different, right? My daughters are biracial. My wife is white. So in our house, race has always been a topic of conversation. It just is, and times like this only amplify that, right? Because we don't have the opportunity to let it impact how we operate in my home. I'm somebody who, if I'm doing my job right, I should be out front talking about these things every day. You should hear my opinion on this. My opinion should be public knowledge. That also means that in my house, I need to make sure these conversations be had before I have it in the public. And that's what we've tried to do. But for my daughters, my conversation is, hey, you're Black and you're white. That is who you are. You don't have to pick one, but the world has already chosen for you. You are Black women. My 7-year-old gets that. My 3-year-old doesn't care about anything at this point. She screams Black Lives Matter with tears going down her face because she can feel the emotion. But she's getting it more so than my 3-year-old should. My 7-year-old understands what's happening. She understands what's taking place. I remember we picked up our Black Lives Matter sign from Chris Schwartz, and we put it in the yard. And Maria reads it. She goes, "So the sign says Black Lives Matter, but Mama, you're white. Doesn't your life matter?" My wife goes, my life does, but right now it's important that everybody knows that your life matters. So for me, it's making sure my daughters and know to stand up for the right thing, know to stand up for the side of justice, regardless of the fact that you are Black and you are white. You'll be treated like a Black woman in this world, so you need to have the strength of a Black woman, but you also need to understand that you have a privilege in being biracial, that people are going to let you have platforms that your darker hued cousins will not get. And that is your opportunity and your responsibility to advocate as fiercely as you can, every opportunity you can for everybody you can.
I want to talk about, you see a lot of people posting, I'm raising my children not to see any color. Where I was raised, it's important to see color because it's important for you to say, it's not judging people based on that color, but it's important because you want to honor someone's background. What are your thoughts on that when people say, I see no color? Well, do you think it's important that we recognize to honor someone's heritage, their color, their race? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, for me, it's a disingenuous statement because it's not possible, first and foremost. We're human beings and we are designed through nature, okay, to perceive everything in our surrounding. Whether in America, you see somebody of color, our society has taught you to perceive that as some sort of threat or a difference, right? So it's disingenuous to say I don't see color. Now, how you perceive and react when you do see a person of color is different. And that's a lot of that's based on our nurture and our nature, where we grew up, how we grew up, and what our experiences are. But for me, I always have a hard time with that because that statement in itself really devalues our differences, which are significant. The things that my culture brings to the Cedar Valley, to the United States, to our globe are significant. So to say that I don't see color is also to say that I don't see the things that make you unique and that give you purpose and maybe even presence. So for me, that's always hard. I don't believe, the melting pot, right, theory is sweet, but we're more like a salad bowl. We all bring something fresh and different to the table, but we don't all melt together and become homogeneous. That's not what a society or community even is.
It feels like the statements that when I was in school, people would say that Oprah Winfrey transcends race. Michael Jordan transcends race, where it seemed that your Blackness was something that you needed to overcome. That you can't be accepted unless I can somehow look over the fact that you're a Black person, because once I can get past that, then we can do some work. We don't see that when it comes to like Irish Fest. We celebrate Irish culture. Irish people love it. Everyone has their green on and their pens because they're celebrating something that they value that is very rich for them. And so when people say, I don't see color, no, see it. Because that's what flavor me. That's what seasons me. That's a piece that you cannot extract and somehow still keep all of the things that I am. I'm a Star Trek fan, and they have the Borg that are all the same mind, all the same unit, and they suck as a culture because there's nothing that makes them unique. So those statements like that, are actually very hurtful in the sense that it's saying the only way that I can be comfortable with this is for my mind to somehow see you as something that you aren't.
I have to ask this because we all know behavior, everything's learned behavior. So racists are not born, they are created, and they're created in the home. So what do you do? What can we do as a community? I know the conversations I have in my house with my children. My husband's half Latino. My children look white. They will never go through the racism that my husband had to endure because they look white. So what kind of conversation, what can we do as a community when we know they're not going to have those conversations about Black Lives Matter, Black kids' lives matter in their home? So what do we have to do to make sure that every child knows this?
I think,
and start being more inclusive.
Sorry. I think one thing I would challenge is that there's data that shows that trauma is passed on through our DNA, right? So racism is not, it's a learned behavior, but it's intrinsic to the fabric of our society in such that it doesn't take much learning. It's almost, it's laissez-faire, right? You don't have to do much to learn to be racist in America. So you don't have to purposely teach someone to be racist. You actually have to make a concerted and intentional effort to do the opposite. It takes a lot of work to ensure that your kids grow up and don't have racial or biased thoughts. That's where the concerted effort is. So to raise a child in America and not purposefully and intentionally make sure they're not racist, by default, they will have racist tendencies because of the society that we live in. We see so many Karens on social media, right? Karens weren't learned behaviors. Karens are the same woman who called the police in Central Park because that is a learned reaction. That's instinctual, right? That's like my dog barking. It's a reflex. Therefore, it's much more than just a purposely taught thing. It's something that we have to work consciously against every day to make sure it doesn't become the case. I mean, I only had to clarify that. Lisa Ferenc, who's an amazing psychiatrist, talks about how the descendants of Jewish people who went through the Holocaust, some of their offspring still suffer from traumatic experiences that they never went through. We know that trauma can be passed through your DNA, but we also know oppressor syndrome can be passed when you have some sort of entitlement to something that you never had. You never owned slaves, but you have this entitlement to hierarchy over people of color. That's instinctual and takes a lot of work to undo.
And to add to that point,
absolutely.
And to add to that point, stating that you don't see color is another way to change that as well. But I think, in addition to Rod's point, you also have to have education and education about different people. If you take a look at some of the very nature of the history books and readings we have, there's no contributions whatsoever in science and in mathematics into who actually built this country. There's no correlation, there's no understanding. So if we want to say we want to have well-rounded children to have an upbringing, I think in addition to what Roz said, we also need to make sure that we give them the proper education. There's no reason right now that we can't get supplemental information off of the internet or Google, real information about the sacrifices and contributions of African Americans, if we're talking about Black kids matter. And then even having Black kids understand what their forefathers have done, not just fight civil rights, but we're talking about the creators of products and opportunities and the brilliance of a people that has been completely miseducated people about. So there's so much to the Black experience that is not being told or not being shared in any of the traditional outlets we have. And how long kids in school nowadays. What is it, 7, 8 hours? That's supposed to be one of their greatest learning periods, and there's absolutely nothing in there about the contributions of African Americans.
And you have to choose diversity. So many people wait for diversity to fall at their doorsteps, like they wait for something cultural to just drop on their doorsteps. We're in Iowa. You have to choose diversity. And so you have to seek out opportunities for your family, not just your children, for all of you to go and experience culture. Go to a powwow, come to the North End Music and Arts Festival, go to a Black church, visit places, choose to support other businesses, make a drive across town. We have to make active choices. So many people think that diversity work will just present itself in front of them. These are active choices. You have to actively engage in order to really become a part and expose all of our kids to all of the amazing culture and the beauty of culture. And I think that it starts at home with how we talk about culture, how we talk about if all these foreigners are starting to come in and take jobs, what that plants in our kids is very different than if we're excited about all the new restaurants and all the new businesses. Our children are listening to us. Our children are listening to us. And some of the anxieties that many of the Black people that I know now, some of those came from the stories of our aunts and our grandfathers and our, like, this isn't far removed. Like, real talk, when we talk about civil rights, the girls that were bombed in the church would have been my mother's age.
Yes.
We're not talking about ancient history. We're talking about people that are still alive, which makes me also know that since those girls would have been my mother's age, some of the people that were standing out in front throwing rocks and saying, nigga, go home, were people that are still alive today. There are people that are alive that experience segregation, even some of it here in our own city. And so really looking at the dialogue that you're having at home with your kids, sometimes, or even in front of them, sometimes you could be planting seeds that we don't even know. And I, as a Black woman, have been making sure that I'm not planting seeds of fear in my kids right now, because some of that dialogue, I don't want them to grow up horribly fearful because they're hearing dialogue that I'm having. So I would challenge my white brothers and sisters to be speaking powerfully about race and about how we're better when we're diverse. Talk to your kids about standing up, about what's right and wrong, and what you expect from them in your household. But that dialogue, if we're going to stop it from being pushed on our kids, that dialogue from us has got to change.
They are definitely listening and they are aware. I want to address this because this is something that you see on social media. This moment someone posts, it happened to me when I posted, Black Lives Matter, we have to have this conversation. They immediately think that if you say Black Lives Matter, then you are anti-police. Can we address this, please? Because that's not, where everyone's against police brutality. This is everyone's fight against racism. But can we please address, and Representative Smith, you had an immediate reaction to that. Why is that not the case?
Well, I see Felicia was smiling because she knows I'm ready to turn up on almost everything. But it's like a pet peeve of mine because my best friend, right, my cousin, the godfather to my daughters is law enforcement in Cedar Falls, right? He's one of the few black officers. So it's like I'm the godfather of his children, not lightly either, because being a law enforcement officer, I know what that means. The chances for me to actually have to parent his daughters is more so than if he worked at John Deere, right? Mm-hmm. So I've taken that burden wholeheartedly, but I laugh because I've never seen a law enforcement officer that was blue, and I hear these blue lives matter, and I'm thinking I've never seen a blue cop anywhere. Like, I just haven't seen it. So if that means that me standing up and saying I am against, when if it's the 1% of you, the 99% who are silent are complicit. And let me see who that one is. Get that one out of your ranks. The silent majority empowers the 1% if they do not speak up. So if your first mindset is, when we say Black Lives Matter, that we are against blue lives, you've already lost in translation what we're meaning to say. And for me, like Felicia kind of talked about, I want to know what you think. So put it on Facebook so I know to operate around you and keep you out of my circle. It's important for me that you show yourself clear and broad, because if you're somebody who said your first reaction is Blue Lives Matter, you've already missed. You're already left behind when we're trying to take our community and our nation. And those are people who the extra effort will have to be made at the back end of this to get them up to speed. But right now we cannot allow them to stand in the way of our progress. But it baffles me that in this time that fissure of, if I say Black Lives Matter, then I have to not respect police. It's foolish to me. I'm saying Black Lives Matter to highlight to law enforcement. I need the 99.99% of you to stand along with me and say that you believe that as well. Because if you don't, if you're silent and you allow others to act in the way that's unjust, then you're complicit because you wear a badge too. Mm-hmm. Right? In the same way that people can generalize that me being a black man with tattoos and earrings is a threat, that generalization applies to you as well if you do not stand up and stand strong. And I think the time for people to be silent is dead. That's done. It's time to be better than you've been before.
And think about this, real talk. Right now, if somebody says something racist on Facebook, people come down on them and they lose their job by 3:00. Like, people, look who that person is. This Karen's got to go. You can be an officer and kill an unarmed black child and still have a job. You can be an officer and accidentally take a life and still have a job. Not criminal charges. We're talking about a job. And then sometimes I get, well, they were fired. It's a person's life. Mm-hmm. That's not the same scale at all. So what we're not saying, we aren't saying we believe that cops are all bad, but we're saying if you look at the consequences for taking a black life, and the frequency of it. And people say, well, it's not every day. I'm working on a project here with Sean Payne and Lori Dale, and we're doing these tombstones. And so we're looking for 100 names because we have 100 tombstones. And I'm doing research on everyone so we can have really absolutely faultless crimes. And so I've got this spreadsheet of names, and I come across the webpage, and I had 114 names. So I'm thinking, this is the site. And so I'm writing all of it down. And as I'm reading the dates, they all end in 2015. And then I realized that this is a list of unarmed black people that were killed in 2015, over 100, 2014, over 89. And so when we're looking at the numbers, and then I'm looking at the ages, we only hear about the big high profile cases. This is happening. There are many that happen without press. And the other pieces, I've seen a video of domestic violence. I've seen a video of that. I've probably seen 5 or 6, right? But what I do know is the data tells me, and police reports tell me that while I've only seen 4 videos, domestic violence is a daily occurrence. It happens all of the time. So if we're seeing videos of this abuse and how bad it is, but we're seeing videos, imagine the things that we're not seeing. It's not like it's not happening. So for our community, what we're seeing is more frequent. I so wish that we could sit down, and this would be an interesting topic, to sit down with someone white and go through their Facebook timeline, because my timeline, I bet, looks a lot different than yours. The things that I see us being killed at least 3 times a day on my Facebook page, at least. And so when we're really talking about this blue lives versus black lives, no. We're just saying we need consequences in your field. You need consequences, just like that customer service rep has consequences, just like that medical doctor has consequences, just like I have consequences in my job. Tara, just like, look, Tara, Amanda, just like you have a consequence. There are consequences that we all face. My question comes in, why are the consequences so low with people that can end your life? That is the Black Lives Matter piece to me.
And that conversation is exactly why we're wearing the shirts, which is exactly why you're seeing the marches, because our lives matter. Black kids' lives matter. And that's why so many people across this, not just this country, across this entire world, because they could see a Black person brutally murdered and there are no consequences, as if their life had no value, as if they did not matter. So that is the cry, that is the plea, that is the understanding that Black lives matter. There's a value to our lives. And, an interesting paradigm shift was, right before our first march had taken place, in a different perspective that Chief Fitzgerald brought in. And that was, what role will the Waterloo Police Department play? Joyce, and I think Raj, you may have been involved, and multiple people involved. And, the understanding could have been like, from police, we're not going to march in this. But it's having the understanding that if you do not believe in police brutality, if you do not believe that George Floyd should have been killed, then you'd be marching out here in solidarity as well. So it's not a them versus us. It is simple fact of the matter that our lives matter, and we need to be treated with human decency, respect, and value, and not slaughtered in the streets for no reason.
And it's not just police. If we talk about the Ahmaud Arbery case in Georgia, where a young man went for a jog, and these 2, white vigilante rednecks went hunting for him. Took justice. And the thing that concerns me as an American it should concern everybody, is that they knew that happened. It happened 2 months, and they had that video for 2 months. And the only reason any charges were filed is because it went on social media. And so that's where I think the power of social media, and that's the problem. And if people aren't outraged by that, and Roz, you said it great, like, I don't want you in my circle anywhere around me. And if you can't speak up against that, I don't care what your race is, anything, that's an issue for me. Because that case is just, it's so incomprehensible to me. But a good friend of mine, she's a person of color, she's like, this is everyday life.
Yeah.
And that's what's sad.
If we weren't enduring a pandemic, I don't know if this takes place. I don't know if our plan for a perfect union gets passed at the Capitol. If people weren't at home with the ability to consume social media 10 to 25% more than they already were, do these things reach the level of the importance that they have in our society? That's one question. Second, Amanda, the fact that you can't fathom why this would happen shows that there is some shift. There is some significant point in which we reach enlightenment where we understand that this is wrong. where our visceral reaction is to feel sick to our stomach, right? But why does it feel that way to you? And to the individuals who did it, why is there such a disconnect? What's happened? Your lived experiences, probably, right? You ensured that you were put in situations and places where you had to have diverse conversations. As a journalist, you had to make sure when you cover the news and you deliver it, you're delivering it in a way that has some fidelity to everybody, because everybody in the community has to accept what you're saying as the research-based, data-driven word, the best that you could find in that moment, right? So that ability to build that relationship was important. Now we see this huge void in between the two. And I think that's where the reflection and the onus falls on white America in a way that it hasn't before. Tim Wise is awesome, talks about race interaction. He's a white guy, but he does it in a way that's easier for white people to explain, even though he's harder on white people than most undoing racism advocates and professors would be. Like Tim Wise goes hard, like he's Reverend Brenda Creighton Smith, but people are receptive to that for a reason. And I think it's indicative of a shift that we're seeing, but it's also alarming that at the same time we see this progress on one end, the leadership in our country is leaning towards something else. And I think that is where our country is at its most pivotal and our most impactful and most dangerous point, to be honest, right? It's like if we don't take heed and make action now, we potentially lose any ground that we've gained, but we also revert back to a time that I didn't exist, that anyone on this call did not exist. And that's what's at stake for our country. That's what's at stake for our communities, is that we have these fissures where we're talking Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. If I said White Lives Matter, will somebody come back and say Blue Lives Matter, or will they just all clap on social media and share it? We have to look at this holistically and see why it feels the way it does. How do we traverse this? Because it's going to be difficult, y'all. This is not easy. We're having this difficult conversation because it has to be had. But to think that this is going to be easy and that any of us will be alive to see true equity, it's probably not the case. I mean, it took 400 years for us to get here. It's going to take another 400 to undo this, to untie this knot. But it doesn't mean that we don't work vigilantly for it. But for our city, we have a lot of work to do. I mean, I would like to see duty to intervene. I think the fact that we got this logo on this car, and the fact that if one Black person in our city is angry about it, that's one Black person too many. Change it. You police the blackest city in Iowa.
I want to talk about that as well, because all my time in the news here locally, there was that perception of, Mayor Hart, I'm talking to you on this one, because there was always that perception of Waterloo. I mean, people would ask me, are you scared at night in Waterloo? Are you scared to go out? When there were just as many, or more at the time, shootings in a neighboring city. And it was, don't go to Waterloo after night, but the other one you could. And then it was said by a former leader in a neighboring city that the shootings that happened only happened because those were Waterloo people, which when he really meant Black people, because that was the shooter and the victim in that case, that came into Cedar Falls. How has that impacted, that perception, Mayor Hart? Why is that? Why do we need to stop this perception? Because we know exactly what we're talking about, where the river like lines and divides two cities. Why is it important now we shift the discussion now?
Well, I think we don't even necessarily have to shift the discussion. We just need to tell the truth. When you take a look at stereotypical crime rates and safe cities, Waterloo is not even on the most unsafe cities list in the entire state of Iowa. But I think that's because of our racial history. I think that is the demonizing of the African American population, us here. I think that is specifically stereotypical of our city, and they try to use that as a weapon for us not to be able to progress. Someone said the other day, "Oh my God, Waterloo's downtown has nothing but bars," right? Well, I guess if we say that, we'll miss the fact that we have a convention center. We've missed the fact that we have Center for Arts with the largest Haitian arts collection in the entire North America. I guess we'll miss the fact that we have hotels, we have restaurants, we have the myriad of the Veterans Center, but we'll miss all of those things because people want to quantify us and put us in a box. But we've been fighting that fight, not just here locally, but we've been trying to fight that fight statewide. Waterloo is one of the most progressive cities in the entire state. We're one of the first to focus on domestic abuse and landlord rights. We've been one of the first to implement, just started in July, Fair Chance Initiative. Waterloo right now has some of the most progressive police diversity and inclusion policies in the entire state of Iowa. We've been on the forefront, but people want to hold us back. And I think it has a lot to do with the diversity that we have in this community.
I agree. We're going to wrap it up here shortly, but I want to start by just asking you bluntly. We know the conversations that are happening in Black households with children. Let's talk to white people like me, your white brothers and sisters. What's the first thing that needs to be said tonight? What's the first thing? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, demonstrate courage. Nothing is going to be comfortable. Nothing is going to be convenient in this time of change. But what's important is that we all demonstrate courage when presented to us. We all can be leaders in this, and we all will have an opportunity to lead, whether it's around our kitchen table, at our place of work, amongst our friends. We will have the opportunity to call out injustice when we hear it and when we see it. The real determining factor of how far this progress goes is how willing we are to step up and demonstrate courage in those moments when it's needed the most. I, for one, I'm not going to back down from any moment to help move these things forward. I think it's important that we all take that. I think this is not a political change that myself or Mayor Hart can make. This is not just a change that Felicia can make, ensuring that our communities and our neighborhoods can be closer aligned and have projects to align with each other. This is bigger than that. This is a heart check for all of us. This is reflecting on who you are, who you've been, and who you want to be going forward. And if you're somebody who dedicates yourself to being better, I'm with you. If you're somebody who's willing to put your heels down and say we're not going to make progress, you'll be left behind. But we're moving forward regardless. And I think that's what's most important to me personally, is that we take that vow as individual human beings to be better than we've ever been.
I would ask two questions. I would say, how do we show that Black Lives Matter, and how can we show that Black Lives Matter? I would look at, I on my shirts at the bottom of these, I always add an I-N. I add in, because for me, Black Lives Matter, it's just not about police. I need Black lives to matter in healthcare, because we're dying in healthcare. I need Black lives to matter in socioeconomic status. I need Black lives to matter in employment situations. I need Black lives to matter with my kids at a playground. So I would really, if I were white and talking to my kids, the first thing I would say are, how do we show this? What do we talk about, and what do we say that shows that Black lives matter? And for that instance, in that house, I'd also ask how other people's lives matter too. How do we demonstrate? How do we show that? And if that answer is nil or not sufficient, I would then ask, well, then how can we show that Black lives matter? How can we show that Black kids' lives matter? What are we going to do? Let's make a plan. What are we going to do? What are we going to either give to or participate in, or even seek to understand better? What are the active, engaging things? Because as I said before, diversity is a choice. Inclusion is a choice. It doesn't happen. It takes work. You have to educate yourself. You have to get out there and commit to doing this. So those would be my things that I would ask.
I agree with what was both said. I think Raz talked, leading by example. Felicia said leading by doing. And I'll also say, leading by learning as well. Our history within this country, based upon which lens you're looking at it, could mean manifest destiny, this great achievement, or it could mean you've taken something from somebody else to get what you thought you you needed to have. Having those real conversations about slavery, which is based upon the foundation. This is the foundation of our country. But having those real conversations and the significant role that other people have played in their lives, I think is extremely, extremely important. So I would lead by learning as well.
I want to thank the three of you for being here tonight. I'm honored to live in a community with you three. You really are leading the way, and I hope more people follow. I hope people at home choose to lead in the right way because our children are watching. This is not choosing one or the other. It's not choosing one race or the other. It's everyone against racism. It's not good enough. We have to be anti-racist. So if it's on social media, if it's on Facebook, if it's on Instagram, continue to talk about it. If you lose followers or friends or family members, then they need to be weeded out anyway. But again, thank you very much. Thank you for putting our children first, all children first. Thank you for recognizing that Black children's lives matter, and I hope the rest of the community follows suit. It was an honor to be here with you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda.